Well, Britons are bracing themselves this month as we're yet again set to be plagued by a series of strikes across the NHS. The head of NHS England has warned of a level of disruption, adding that patients will be paying the price for the unions and the government not resolving their disputes. Some talk these disputes could go on for another 2 years.
Honestly, the doctors are threatening that strikes in the NHS could continue until at least 2025 unless the government meets their demands. Well, joining us now is political commentator Piers Pottinger. Feels like we've been talking about strikes in the NHS for a really long time, Piers, and I don't know what the solution is. Do you?
No, and I don't think anybody does. I think the problem is that one party has got a tin of Band-Aid and the other party has got a box of Elastoplast when it comes to the NHS. And finally, over the weekend, the head of the NHS came out of her cupboard and talked about how it was the patients were going to suffer. Well, it didn't take a member of Mensa to work that one out. Yeah. Unfortunately, what everyone really should face reality. We need a royal commission. We need a complete restructuring of the NHS, because throwing more money, patching bits up, saying you're going to hire thousands of new doctors and nurses in years to come is not going to get ahead of what's happening. The change in demographics, the way that people are having more illnesses now diagnosed, so they go for treatment, so there's more different kinds of treatments required. All of these things, we're behind the game, and everything they're doing at the moment is trying to patch it up. Equally, for junior doctors to demand 35% pay rise at a time like this is preposterous. And they should sit round the table, get practical, please put political differences aside and actually try and do something to stabilise the NHS. It's not going to get much better. It's probably going to get worse until there's a real fundamental change.
And Piers, we saw, because the Mail put this on the front page last week, the consultants were going on strike for 2 days, straight after the junior doctors. They're earning on average £128,000 a year. And on the 2 days they go on strike, oh, very nice too, they can go and earn thousands more in the private sector. That's allowed.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely disgraceful. It's the only way to describe it. And those consultants really, I think, should look at their conscience very hard indeed, because I think it's outrageous what they're doing. And as the head of the NHS herself said, the only people suffering will be the patients.
Yeah.
Is the problem partly, Piers, that no political party wants to be the one who goes down in history as the person who finally brought the NHS to a close, effectively, by the definition that we have at the moment, free at the point of service?
But you don't need to close it. I mean, it's been 75 years since it started, and you actually have to change it. Yeah. An awful lot has changed in 75 years. Marvellous technology, all kinds of new kind of diagnosis. The demographics have changed completely about the ageing population. So it's quite right, you need to look at it again. I also think that in the past, whereas a lot of voters would have been very nervous about anyone tinkering with it, they all now realise, because from personal experience, that the NHS needs massive restructuring. So I think the general public would welcome a royal commission, would welcome a proper investigation and restructuring.
Can we ask you about a story which we're going to be talking about a little later in the programme, Piers? Nigel Farage is one of many people who now discover he's had his bank account closed down. Coots have refused to say why. There's been serious allegations made against him by Chris Bryant in the Commons, which are not true, about him taking money from Russia. Dominic Lawson, writing in the Mail today, says that he was barred from his 16-year-old daughter having a bank account. She's got Down syndrome because of her grandfather, the former Chancellor Nigel Lawson. What's going on with banks?
And Dominic's wife, Rosa, her father, who was a Viscount, was also had his account closed. I mean, it's nonsense. And the problem, this comes from over-regulation of banks. Very recently, the head of a major bank told me that he spends 85% of his working time on compliance and governance.
Good Lord.
And there's so many rules, there's so many regulations. The world has become fixated about money laundering. And, of course, don't forget, some of the biggest banks have been fined billions of pounds for their involvement in helping probably unwittingly, drug cartels in Mexico particularly. And the over-regulation, this over-compliance, it means that banks have become afraid of their own shadow, in fact, afraid of their own customers.
Yeah.
But that would suggest that it's the regulation around the transfer of money which is causing these bank accounts to be closed. And as Nigel has been at pains to point out, in his case, well, he doesn't know. I think that's the worst thing for me, is that
Absolutely.
People like Nigel who have their bank accounts closed down, unlike Nigel Lawson's granddaughter, they often don't know the reason.
No.
And that it's like wokeism. This is totalitarian woke culture for me. Your politics don't fit with what our company is happy to be associated with. So we're going to take away your right to spend your money.
Also, it's a question of who within these banks makes these arbitrary decisions.
Yeah.
Because I can't believe it's someone very senior, for example, trying to shut the account of a Lawson. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me. But I'm afraid it's over-regulation within banking gone wrong. And this is also having a knock-on effect for the economy because, for example, the London Stock Exchange is suffering from international companies shunning it because of over-regulation from the Financial Conduct Authority particularly. And that makes us less competitive. And when banks are spending the heads of banks are spending 85% of their time on regulation, it surely should tell the world at large this is wrong.
Yeah, let's take you to Scotland too, because there'll be some significant interest for you in this. It's the King's Scottish Week, effectively.
Absolutely, yes.
Edinburgh, and they're having the equivalent of the Scottish coronation. Now, of course, you know about the one they had in the 1950s.
That's right. Well, my father organised that for Her late Majesty. And it's going to be a very similar sort of thing.
Why did your father get asked to do that, Piers? Was he...
Because he was a senior civil servant,
right,
and had experience of being involved in major events. But this one is going to be quite similar. It's a service of celebration at St Giles Cathedral is the central part of it. There's the being given the keys effectively to Edinburgh, which from the Lord Provost, which is rather nice. And I think it should be a very, very positive occasion. Although I'm sure the SNP, one of whom, Minister, has already decried it and saying it's costing too much money. Actually, it's a Green Minister, but it's a Green SNP alliance. It's still a Minister in the Cabinet who really shouldn't have actually spoken out about it. It's really disgraceful. But I think it'll be a terrific occasion. The sort of cloud on the horizon is what we were reading about Orkney. Because Orkney, where all my father's family came from, in fact, Pottinger's a very common name there. But although there are only 22,000 people in Orkney, they were originally part of Norway and Denmark. And in fact, it was in the 15th century that the Orkney and Shetland formed part of Queen Margaret's dowry when she married King James III.
I didn't know that.
And it was a present, if you like, a wedding present. And Orkney is very much nearer Oslo than it is Edinburgh or even, obviously, London. And they are looking into whether they might have a look at where they should fit into the economy. Because at the moment they are underfunded compared to the Western Isles. And of course they've got terrible ferry problems. Again, this is down to the SNP's total mismanagement.
They're 4 years late, the ferries in Scotland.
Of course. But they're even worse in Orkney because it actually, although it sounds a bit alarming, a bit of the UK maybe disappearing, I think they're quite right to look at it because they need to get funding. I'm afraid it's not really a very viable place. They're already the most heavily subsidised people in the UK. And if they can get more money and more subsidy by being part of someone else, well, you know, we'll
Would it make a nice holiday destination for this summer to go to Orkney?
Wonderful. Absolutely
wonderful. There we
wonderful,
go. So we need to go there, spend our money, keep the tourism alive and keep hold of Orkney.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Thank
Piers
you,
Pottinger,
Piers.
always a joy. Always learn something from
I know,
Piers
don't we?
Pottinger,
It's amazing.